Okay, so who's this guy here?
Henry VIII.
Yeah, Henry VIII. All right. And who was he? By raise of hand, who is Henry VIII? What do we know about him? Aaron?
He was a king.
Good. King of what?
His name was Henry.
Yes. Where was he a king from? From England.
Wait, he was king of Spain?
Okay, we need to go back to the whole raise your hand thing because I get too many answers and most of them are wrong. He's a king of what country do we say? Right? England. Okay. So king of England. And he is down the line from the last king that we talked about. But he is part of, remember we talked about the War of the Roses? He would have been in the line of the Lancaster family, but he brings the two families, the Lancaster and the York families together under the Tudor name. So his birth name was Henry Tudor, and he is going to lead a line of future kings until we get to eventually the Stuarts, which will probably come second semester. So Henry VIII, a couple things about him that would be helpful for you to understand before we get into what he did. He was a student of theology. So what does that tell you about him? If he's a student of theology, what does that help you know about Henry? Libby? Mm-hmm. Knows a lot about the Bible, knows a lot about who God is. He was somebody who disagreed with Luther. And he did not think Luther's ideas were accurate. He would have sided more with the Catholic Church instead of Luther. And so because of that, he and Luther actually went back and forth a little bit. Luther didn't reply back to him. But he went back with some of Luther's followers, and he was criticizing some of Luther's ideas. Now, he was also an expert athlete. Yeah. You're not convinced. I don't blame you.
He's probably going to be in a linebacker.
He was a different type of athlete than what you would think of as far as in our professional leagues today. But he was very athletic for his build, for his day. He was pretty skilled with those things, but he did lack something. He lacked self-control, perhaps even in some of his food choices. But he lacked self-control, and that's it. And I normally wouldn't jump into that except for the next thing that we are going to talk about, and that has to do with his wives.
Oh my
I have self-control with that too.
Now,
Here's.
Three different Catholics.
so here's, you've noticed that you started counting. All right, there's 6 women up there. We need to understand the context. We understand what's going on. Yes?
Why it says James Seymour, and I know who James Seymour is, and that's not her.
You talking about the actress?
Yes.
Wait.
Same name, different person.
Wait. So why are there 2 Anns and 3 Catherines?
Well, that was a common name.
Dr. Clinton.
Common name.
Yes.
Yeah.
There were only 5 different
Okay. Now, before we start jumping to conclusions, let's understand the context. Let's understand what's going on here. Chance?
I think Mr. Sagador told me about these.
Yeah, very well could have been. This is
Wait, question?
Yeah.
Did the last one outlive him?
yes.
Oh, I know this. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Okay.
And then the third one he killed.
Now,
2 of them he divorced.
this is called the King's Matter. Because of the fact that divorce was considered a cliche topic. You did not discuss divorce. It was not acceptable in that culture. It was not something that anybody who was of high society ever considered. Divorce was something that was not allowed in the Catholic Church. In fact, if you asked for divorce, you were always going to be told no, and you were going to be criticized for even asking for a divorce because the Catholic Church was not going to grant it. Now, here's the matter that the king is dealing with, and the fact that Henry wants to have a son. Why is it so important to him to have a son? Joel, what do you think? His throne, his kingdom, yes. Good. So he needs to have a son because he could do it through his daughter. But if he passes the throne through his daughter, she becomes queen. What happens if she marries another dude? Then he becomes king, and now it's no longer in his family line. It's now in the guy's family line. So he really wants to have a son. And for 7 years, he and his wife, and his first wife was Catherine.
Which one?
The first one, of course.
Okay, what you got?
First one was Catherine of Aragon. Now, Catherine of Aragon, from most accounts, seemed like he really loved her. And it seemed like he really wanted to spend his life with her. But when Catherine has trouble in childbirth after her first child, that first child is born, but it's a girl. And she's not able to have any other fully developed children afterwards. She has 3 more children who are stillborn, which means that they die in the process of being born. And there are 2 other that die shortly after they are born. So she has 5 total children that she had to bury, which is pretty awful. And King Henry is just distraught in the fact that he has a daughter. That's great. Anybody know the daughter's name?
Angela.
Not for Catherine. You're off by one girl. All right. Catherine's daughter's name was Mary. Mary. Okay. Now, if I were you, and I know I'm not, but I have worked through this a number of times in the past, I would create a chart in your notes.
Mr. Joe, can you please erase the words and
Oh my gosh.
No, please.
Is that better? So, number 1,
Mary Catherine. Because he married Catherine and her daughter's name is Mary. Oh.
we have Mary. Okay?
I'm gonna need a different color.
Is anybody familiar with British history enough to predict who this may become?
Bloody Mary.
Yes. Okay.
Bloody Mary.
Oh.
Wait, did she kill herself?
I was scared of Bloody Mary for like 3 years. And I
Why is she called Bloody Mary?
I will get to that. So
Because
just
she
hold your
kills
question.
everybody.
Not quite. This is Mary the First. She is going to become queen much later on down the line. But this is where she comes from because she is the oldest daughter of Catherine of Aragon. Now, Catherine of Aragon, as I mentioned, was not able to produce a son for Henry. And so Catherine begins to get beyond the childbearing years. Yes?
I thought Bloody Mary was a drink.
It is a drink, but it was originally a wine.
We're going to focus on Bloody Mary the person, or Mary the First. Is no, we're going to talk about the history of what it really means, who she is. You can draw your own conclusions on the legend because it's not going to be too hard to figure out. So, number 2. Oh, by the way, so Catherine becomes beyond the childbearing years. So, what does Henry do with Catherine?
Bye.
Divorces her. Okay.
What?
That's so mean.
Nice.
That's
I
so
thought they
mean.
couldn't do that in the Catholic Church.
Yes, absolutely.
He's the king.
So, not really, because
Did he get permission?
hold on, just a second. Hang on your question. So, he wants a divorce. Haley points out that Catholic Church doesn't allow divorce. So, he's the king. Can he do what he wants?
Yeah.
No.
No. Why do you say no?
Because he will be impeached and killed.
Not impeached. There's another
This
word.
is the treaty of.
No.
It's
The Pope will take away his power.
Excommunication. Okay. So, if he gets excommunicated from the church, then that means that he is
No longer king.
well,
Not
he's still
power.
king, but
He doesn't have as much
People
power.
are more afraid
No, no.
of the church than they are of the king.
so if he gets excommunicated, it means that his soul is condemned to hell for eternity. It really has nothing to do with his king power in this particular case. So if he goes to the Pope and asks for a divorce, the Pope can say yes or no, and the Pope's going to say no.
If you're excommunicated, could you get unexcommunicated?
Reinstated, yes, you could, but it would probably be a different Pope that would have to do that to you.
How would that work?
He just writes an excuse note.
So did he get permission from the Pope because she couldn't have a boy?
No.
How
So-
did he get permission to do that?
He doesn't.
He just
So here's what he did. This is the king's matter. This is his official break with Rome. He has a disagreement with the Pope. The Pope says, no divorce for you. And the king says, but I really want one. And the Pope says, I don't care if you really want one. The answer is no. The Pope says, fine, I'm going home and I'm going to create my own church. It's like the ultimate kid conversation of, fine, I'm going home and I'm going to play with my toys at home and I'm not going to associate with you anymore. This is where England officially breaks from Rome and no longer considers themselves Catholic. He goes back to England and he decides he's going to create his own church known as the Anglican Church or the Church of England. Which, by the way, that is the church that, if we fast forward another couple hundred years, is going to have a whole lot of problems within it where the Puritans and the Separatists are going to get fed up with it, and they're eventually going to move to the New World. Tie these connections, this timeline together. Okay, so had Henry not broken away from the Catholic Church here, it could have changed the course of who came to the New World in the 1600s. Okay, this is 1534. It's less than 100 years until we have the Mayflower. Okay? Now, let's talk through
So did the birth happen between his 2 years?
yes, it happened when he was trying to divorce Catherine of Aragon. Yes.
Question.
Yep.
Oh wait, it was. So the last one, right? She survived, right?
We're not there yet.
I know. I just gotta.
You're jumping way ahead of me. Just
she or
Calm
is she
down,
not like
Chance.
a
hold
teenage
on.
one that he married?
Hold on.
That's what I want to ask.
So,
He married a teenage
Catherine of Aragon gives one daughter. Her name was Mary.
Married,
He divorces her.
right?
He sends her away to a convent for the rest of her life. He makes sure she's taken good care of. Make sure that she's taken care of because he really did care for Catherine of Aragon, but she could not give him the one thing he wanted.
Oh boy.
Right.
That's
Now-
petty.
That is not true.
Wife number 2.
Have kids.
What?
That doesn't mean that he should replace his, obviously he cared more about his throne than he did about
Anne.
Which Anne? Would you divorce your
This
wife?
is
No, no.
Is it going in order?
Yeah. This is Anne Boleyn.
I don't want
Can you watch
I want lots of
Hey.
puppies.
That was a good
Little puppies running around.
I know, I missed it.
Anne Boleyn, Boleyn.
Bowling.
Anne Boleyn is wife number 2. So Anne Boleyn was already the mistress of Henry VIII. So this was already, there was a relationship that had started already before the divorce was finalized. It was very common, yes.
Dang.
So while
He's got divorced and still trying to pick up women.
while it is frowned upon in our society, and for obvious reasons, it was also frowned upon in his society, but he was the king. It happened a lot. It was hidden away until here he was being impatient, waiting to hear back from the king. He decided to have a secret marriage because Anne was pregnant. And if it were to be found out that he had a child out of wedlock, according to their customs and according to the church, that child would not be eligible for the throne. So we're going to talk about some of the changes that he makes in the church in a little bit that would adjust that. But at least at this point, he had to have a secret marriage and a really quick one. And so that way it was legal to have this child. And eventually, his divorce is finalized. He creates his own new church. He finds a archbishop that is willing to grant him the divorce. His divorce is finalized. He sends away Catherine of Aragon. He now is free to marry publicly Anne Boleyn. And apparently, people aren't able to do math and have a little bit of trouble understanding all that goes into that. And they have a child. And so Anne's child is Elizabeth.
No, that's a boy, obviously.
Wait, did any of these two?
Is this Elizabeth the First?
Nope. Just wait. Think about your comments here. Are your comments contributing to the conversation, or are they detracting from it? So we have Elizabeth here that is born. And here we have no more children born to Anne. He kind of loses favor with her, or she loses favor with him. And so he decides that because this did not turn out to be a boy, and Anne Boleyn was getting to be a little bit frustrating on his part. He really never loved her. She was just kind of like that mistress on the side, that he decides it's time to get rid of her. And so he can't divorce a second wife, at least not at this point. So he decides to set her up. So he sets her up for apparent treason, where she said something against the king. She was accused of adultery and having an affair outside of their marriage, which I think is ironic because of how their relationship started.
She could have been like, yeah, but we do the same thing.
But he's also the king, so he wins. So he actually had her executed for that adultery, and so she is done away with.
What about her kid?
Elizabeth is,
Same place.
she is sent away. I can't remember if it was to France. I mean, it was still.
Or he just sends all of
Wait, what happened to Mary?
She was sent away as well. She was not treated as well as Elizabeth, but the two of them kind of, if I remember right, they grew up together, and they become really close, even though they had different moms. And they're going to come back and defend each other later on, and that's a cool story.
Did they know they were like in
That
the
is
same
like the
dads?
definition.
Did they know what?
They had the same dads.
Yes.
Did they know they had the same dad?
Yes, they did.
Mary?
Jane Seymour.
Anne of Cleves.
So Anne of Cleves is wife number 3.
What about Jane Seymour?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's number 4.
Don't skip
I jumped
Jane
ahead.
Seymour.
It's okay, Libby.
Thank you for catching that.
Seymour, Seymour.
I'm just writing it down. Okay, so Jane Seymour. She has a child.
It's a girl.
Hercules.
Edward, it's a boy.
It's a boy. Congratulations. Yay.
But he dies.
No.
They weren't married.
No, they were married. Jane has a boy. His name is Edward. Unfortunately, Jane dies in childbirth.
So does Edward.
No.
Oh.
Edward
I died.
did not have a child.
Divorce.
I wish.
Die. Divorce, kill, survive.
Yeah, I know you know the song,
I know-
but
I couldn't remember the song at first though. But I knew what we were talking about.
so Jane provides him a son. We're going to talk about Edward a little bit later on and what he does, but he is now the heir to the throne of England, and it's exactly what Henry has been asking for, what he's been wanting. But why does he get another wife? Or what?
No, 3 extra ones.
3 extra. Okay, let's go on to number 4. Number 4 is Anne of Cleves.
What about Edward?
What, Edward?
We
Yeah,
just
tell
said
Edward's
we were gonna
story.
talk about him
We're going to talk about him later. He's going to live in the palace. He's going to grow up as the prince, as the king's son.
Not sent away.
No, he's not, because he is being groomed
Or he's a male.
Because
He is
he's
a
a
male
boy.
and not.
Right, yes. Because he is in line for the throne. So they are training and teaching him how to become the next king.
But why do you think they would keep the girls there? Like, I
Because
get
they
like
couldn't
that
become
they can't
king.
become heirs.
Right.
But like, why not just have them in the house?
You'll have to ask Henry.
He's dating.
He's what?
So, why do you think might have been some reasons why you would have sent him away?
Because the others.
Okay, perhaps. So, I think you're onto something there. At least in my interpretation, I don't have any historical basis for this other than if you think about Catherine of Aragon, he loved her, and the only reason he divorced her was because she couldn't provide a son. So seeing Mary every day would have been a painful reminder of that love that he sent away. I'm just saying.
They sent her away. Okay, never mind.
But
And then the other one who
under, you may have a different approach to it, but understand that could be a legitimate reason. Doesn't mean it's excusable. Doesn't mean it was the right decision, but sends her away for that reason. Anne Boleyn, I believe he kind of turned on her and didn't really love her anymore. So seeing Elizabeth around would have been a reminder of that mistake. And so then he provided for them. He made sure their life was comfortable. He made sure that they were well taken care of, well educated. They lived the palace life, just not actually with Henry. So they didn't have. And again, life was different because you all know how our culture works and how the family works. Family was different back then. They wouldn't have seen Dad even if they would have been living in the palace.
Wait,
They
did the sisters kill
have-
Edward?
No.
Oh.
No.
Why
That. Yeah. Somebody have a question over here?
Why did they not see Dad?
Just because the father, especially if you're the king, didn't really fulfill all the fatherly roles and duties that dads do today. He let the wife or the mother of the children raise them. He would show up on occasion, maybe for special events, but they really didn't have much interaction because he concerned himself with the king's matters. So let's talk about Anne of Cleves. So Anne of Cleves becomes wife number 4, and she has no children.
Execution.
No children.
He divorces her.
Yep.
He divorces her.
So, in fact, Anne of Cleves, yes, she becomes divorcee number 2.
Because
Well-
he doesn't love her.
How?
Because
He says bye.
the king was kind of repulsed by her.
Wait, why? Just because I didn't give a kid or
Why do you
another
think
reason?
in the first place?
She was loved.
Well,
She was a little unusual.
She-
And he's like super high pitched.
so she does not have. I don't know all the reasons, but from the accounts that I have read, she is just not favorable to the king. Why he married in the first place, I don't know. So he divorces her, sends her off to a convent as well.
Explain what you mean by not favorable.
She was ugly.
I knew it! That was not wrong! I knew it!
I don't know.
So you don't know why he married
No.
her?
Other than she was available and
She was a
She-
Think about all these women though, like I don't understand, like, oh yeah.
He's not even
Nice to
horrible.
get
He's
him.
better than he's
Yeah.
He's divorced all of these and had her executed and they just get sent away.
Yeah.
She looks perfectly fine. The first wife's like an alien.
wife number 5, Catherine Howard.
Actually, she's one of the prettiest ones I've ever
They're all.
Well,
She
yeah.
probably paid the painter for that one.
Me. That's called Photoshop back in the
It's
day.
true. Yeah. All right.
That's funny.
So, Catherine Howard.
Catherine Howard.
Guys done?
She has no children. She is young. She's about 19 years old when she marries the king. And this is your classic Hollywood storyline where the young girl marries the old rich guy. You know, yeah, it's gross. She ends up having multiple men on the side of this marriage. So legitimately, she is executed for adultery, and she is removed from the palace. She is beheaded, as I believe is her method of execution. And so this was just a bad situation altogether. That's really poor writing.
Okay, so his
Okay.
fourth and third one didn't have any kids. His first one had a daughter, his second one had a daughter, his third one had a son.
Yeah,
And it's-
two
He got
girls,
3
a boy.
kids right now.
Yeah, 3 kids right now.
Okay.
So
Yep.
Catherine Parr does not have kids.
I bet you Catherine Parr's
There
gonna have
wasn't
like
time
15
for her to have
kids.
kids because she was goofing around and people were like,
Wait.
and
She was too
then
young.
was found out.
We're not to Catherine Parr yet, but we're Catherine Howard.
Did she have kids with the other?
Catherine Howard, there were no children involved there. I'm not sure exactly why. If it was just really quick or if there weren't any children born there.
Did you explain why he was getting married if he already had Edward?
Because his wife died.
Well, part of it was never a bad idea to have a backup, just in case something happened to that oldest child.
Wait.
And
If you have this boy, why do you have a baby back with his first wife? He really loved her.
That's
Why not?
if your husband divorced you, sent you away because you couldn't provide a male child, and sent you to a convent, would you be willing to take him back?
What's a convent? Heck no.
It's a place where women.
Yeah.
It's like a female monastery,
Oh, yeah,
like nuns and yeah.
Well, we should be coming in.
Last wife.
Those are words I never heard.
Let's get refocused here.
Wow.
Number 6.
The king dies.
This is Catherine Parr.
She has no kids either.
Now, Catherine Parr, no children.
What the heck?
Isn't she like
Catherine-
super young?
Catherine Parr, she's not as young as Catherine Howard.
So Catherine Parr is super young. Okay.
Yes. Now, Catherine Parr was the last wife. She was more of a caregiver in Henry's old years. She was like kind of like a full-time nurse taking care of him because he was old. He was in bad health. Going back to your question about Edward was a sickly child, and they
I
were
knew
not
it.
sure if he was going to survive. So that is also part of the reason why he continued to have more wives, and that's why he kind of wanted a backup plan in case Edward did not survive, which he's not going to, by the way. Spoiler alert for you.
Ha! Mary Elizabeth, come back.
And yes, they will. So when we get to the end of his life here, the last wife, Catherine Parr, there's really not a love story there. There's not a whole lot of story to tell other than the fact that she basically just cared for him through the last days of his life, and she ended up outliving him and surviving, the only wife to actually remain in favor with Henry by the time that he was done.
What about the first wife?
Dang.
He still liked her.
He did, but he sent her away. So that causes a whole lot of problems in there. Now, let me mention a couple changes that he makes in the church. Okay, we've talked about all of his wives. When he creates the new church, and understand that from this point forward, I'm going to refer to the Catholic Church as the Church of Rome. I'm going to refer to the church in England as either the Anglican Church or the Church of England. They're the same thing. So they are a break off from the Roman Catholic Church, and they are going to have most of the same format, the same belief system as the Catholic Church with a few minor changes. I want to mention those here so that you know what that's all about. Justin?
Did Edward survive to take the throne?
Yes.
Alrighty.
He is going to be number one conversation on Monday.
Aww. Monday.
Why not now?
I cannot wait. Edward. Can
Well-
we do it today?
No, it's
please?
Edward.
We might be able to.
Edward.
I'll be able to talk about him.
Don't
Joe?
call him names.
Are you going to explain why Mary was called Bloody Mary?
Yeah.
Or Eduardo.
I will. Not today. That'll be next week.
She got that.
Go home and look it up.
Okay, a couple things in the church. Doctrine stays the same. Doctrine of the church stays the same. The one thing that changes is divorce is allowed in the Anglican church.
Yeah, bro, why the church of England do that?
That's okay.
Stop.
The other thing that changes is that they remove some of the relics and some of the worship of what Henry would call idolatry, or Luther would call idolatry. They begin to use English instead of Latin in the church. So that would be considered a positive thing for the people in England. So there's not a whole lot that changes, but those few minor things cause enough division with the Roman Catholic Church to where the Pope is really upset with England right now. And they're going to break ties